But let me just push a little bit on the notion. Look, it is true that Hume thinks that moral values are subjective in the sense that they are perceiver dependent, right, or valuer dependent. Mm-hmm. But he also believes that there is normativity, that there are oughts, that there are moral oughts.
Okay, so how does he get there?
Okay, so let me explain how he gets there. And this is a common strategy, again, that he employs across the various subjective properties. So let me start with a very easy case. So in the case of color perception, if you tell me that a stop sign is blue, there's a very straightforward sense in which I can say not only that you were wrong, but that you ought to see it as red. And the sense of ought there that's at work is in terms of what we would call a competent perceiver or a competent judge, right? The reason why you're seeing blue is because you are in some way physiologically defective, right? And this doesn't have any sort of moral connotation. This is simply a statistical judgment. If most people saw stop signs as blue, that would be the norm, right? So I don't want to get anybody to get all worked up about this, that I'm, saying that people with disabilities are defective in some moral sense. In a purely statistical sense, otherwise we wouldn't call it a disability, all right? Hume thinks that this can be carried over. So in the case of aesthetic value, Hume has a paper called Of the Standard of Taste, which I just taught in my aesthetics class. And what Hume says there is that beauty is a subjective property, but that there are better and worse judges of beauty. Now, such that we can judge. So if someone was to say Britney Spears is better than Mozart, Hume would say there's a very straightforward sense in which that's wrong, and in which we could say to them, you ought to think that Mozart is better than Britney Spears, and the ground on which you ought to think that is what a competent judge of music would say. Okay, and Hume's account of competence in the case of aesthetics is roughly by appeal to certain credentials, experience, sensitivity, whether you accept it or not, whatever. I'm just telling you the form of this reply. With regard to ethics, it's a lot more like the answer with respect to color perception. Hume thinks that there is a human nature, right? He thinks that the normal human being is fundamentally sympathetic. This he shares with a lot of the other Scottish moralists.
Fundamentally sympathetic, meaning
that our natural instinct is one of sympathy to others, right? That sympathy diminishes as the other is farther and farther away from us, both in relation and in space and time, right? So I naturally am going to care more about my sister than about a total stranger. I'm naturally going to care more about somebody right in front of me than somebody on the other side of the planet.
The way it actually works is sympathy also diminishes to the extent that someone has a conflicting interest with yours. If it's your rival for a mate or something, you're not very sympathetic.
But notice that those are all types of distance from you.
Okay.
Right? Those are all types of distance from you. But Hume, like many of the Scottish moralists, and I'm thinking of Hutcheson in particular, generally think that human nature normally is sympathetic and benevolent. And so for Hume, somebody who has malicious sentiments and engages in malicious behavior, yes, good and bad are subjective properties, right? But we can still say that they're wrong and that they ought to act otherwise because we can appeal to what a normal human being would do.
So they're not conforming to human nature when they do
That's right.
Here evolutionary psychology would say he's just flat out wrong. We are, in fact, designed to be antagonistic to people depending on how we consciously or unconsciously perceive them in relation to our interests.
But I did not say that his account of normativity in ethics is compelling. I'm just simply saying if a characteristic is subjective, then the only way you can preserve normativity is by some account of competent judge, right? That's the only way, because you can't point to an objective fact, because there is none, right? So the only thing you could say is that someone is a better or worse judger of something if you want to preserve that ought, that ability to use the ought. Now, to the extent to which Hume is wrong about human nature, that option is lost to him, and he doesn't have then a compelling account of normativity in ethics. Yeah. I just simply wanted to say he does not. His subjectivism does not lead to a anti-normativism, right?
Yeah, that's a little bit ironic to me. I wonder if he was, he was very bold in being basically an atheist in his time, and maybe it was just going a little too far.
We're not sure about whether he was an atheist or a deist. It's not entirely
okay.
known.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, that's another interesting thing about we should get to the question of design that he touched on a little. I just discovered by doing my little quick online research on him. But I wonder. I mean, it does seem to me like he's kind of straining against the point he himself has made about reason and the passions when he asserts that, yes, we can preserve notions of moral value. And I just wonder if he had lived at a time when utilitarianism were better developed. I don't know what stage it was in. I mean, Bentham hadn't even started. Bentham's father wasn't even around, right? So if he had lived at the end of the 19th century, I wonder if he would have found, consequentialism and more specifically utilitarianism kind of appeal. It seems to me a more natural fit.
Well, substantively, he is sometimes called a utilitarian.
Yeah, well, that seems natural to me.
Substantively, his views align with the utilitarians.
Yeah.
But the arguments are not done in that way. The value theory is not done in that way. But the substance of what the ethics consists of is, roughly speaking, utilitarian, yes.
Mm-hmm.